of Tuesday the 29th of April 2025. We're going to get underway with our opening karakia. Please feel free to join in. Me noi tātou, whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hiaki ana te atakura, he tio, he hoka, he hauhu, ti hei, mauri ora. I've received no apologies ahead of the meeting. Any addition? I've got lateness for Mr. Mayor. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Parkin. All in favour say aye. I declare that carried. Moving on to public comment. We've got Bruce Bedding online. He's provided us with a write-up ahead of the meeting, which councillors had the opportunity to read. And welcome, Bruce. If you wish to make any introductory comments, then we can hand over for questions.
Thank you. Basically, I submitted a written summary of what I wish to say in condensed form. It's basically just saying I think it's great that we're doing the battery recycling trial in Eastbourne, and I wanted to call out the importance of community engagement in anything like this, that these things don't happen in isolation, and for them to be successful, the constant and repeated community engagement and consultation is really critical to getting the community buy-in. So that's basically what I am trying to say in the submission, and I welcome any questions if anybody's got any or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce, for your comments, but also your preparation and information ahead of the meeting. Opening now for any questions from elected members. Councillor Mitchell, then Councillor Parkin.
Thank you, Bruce. Just reading through your proposal, your submission earlier, I guess one takeaway for me is that Eastbourne's really lucky to have an engaged and, feels like a weird word to use, compliant community in terms of all the extra things you ask them to do, like rinsing out and emptying the save boards correctly and putting tape over the ends of the terminals of the batteries. Do you have any advice for other parts of the city who might not expect such a high level of, I guess it's the execution thing for me, people doing things the right way. Do you have any advice for how a community can be encouraged to make sure they are doing things the right way when these opportunities are available to them?
Thank you, Andy. Obviously, I'm not experienced in the possible behaviours of other parts of the community. I can only, I guess, reinforce the fact that it's a repetition thing of constantly reminding the community that we're doing it, congratulating or reinforcing the benefits of it, and reinforcing the behaviours that have to go with it. So that's the protection of battery terminals and the cleaning of Tetra Paks. So those messages are constantly being reinforced all the time. And I guess we rely on the fact that the people that are going to make the effort will do so. You know, they won't want to waste their effort by not doing it properly. So by reinforcing that, we're hoping to get, well, we do get compliance. We get a really good result from that. So it's that repetition, that constant keeping it in front of the community, and not just saying it once and then letting people sort of find out for themselves. You don't want to turn up to deposit batteries or Tetra Paks and find out that you haven't done the things that are prerequisites for recycling them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Parkin.
Kara, thank you for the mahi, Bruce. I was just wondering if you could elucidate on the challenges with Tetra Paks. I know I got one heck of a shock when I cut my first Tetra Pak open and cleaned it thinking that I'd rinsed it thoroughly. But I note that in your instructions, you quite clearly convey that they need to be opened and rinsed. But I'm just wondering what tricks you've come across in terms of educating the community to be able to do that.
Yeah, thank you. Basically, it is. I had the same thing. You know, you rinse them out and then cut them open and find out that the rinsing hasn't done a lot of good in some cases. So it really is important, I think, to repeat to people that they really do need to open them up and rinse them and dry them. I was surprised to find that you can put the caps back on. We can leave those because you obviously take those off to rinse them in the first place. So it's just that repeated message of opening and drying and flattening. It just seems to work. We do occasionally get people that submit Tetra Paks that haven't been opened up, rely on the fact that they have been cleaned or rinsed anyway, and we have zero problems in terms of odor or anything like that. And as I said, I think Earthlink have congratulated us on the quality of what we're recycling.
Thank you, Bruce. Final question to Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. I'm really pleased that Council's moving into this trial, but to help us with the sometimes scepticism we face from ratepayers about what actually happens to recycled goods, Bruce, do you know where these recycled batteries are going and how they're recycled, or maybe our officers will know?
The batteries I don't know, but the batteries I take basically take the batteries to Bunnings and deposit them there. So I guess it would be easy enough to find out from Bunnings what they do with those batteries, but I haven't followed the chain of processing for the batteries. The Tetra Paks are go to a company called Saveboard in Hamilton, and they are recycled into wallboards. So there's a definite sort of chain of processing there, and the nice thing about those is that they get processed into something that people can identify with. So I try to sort of reinforce within the community that every 400 Tetra Paks we recycle, we're generating a wallboard out of it, which is something that people can get their heads around.
On behalf of the committee, thanks again, Bruce, for your ongoing work for the community and the environment. Ia mihi nui kia koe.
Thank you.
That ends our public comment section for today. Before we move on to the presentation from Te Ara Whakamoa Group Work Update, I just want to acknowledge Jenny, who's here today with the Democratic Services team, one of our new members of staff. Welcome to the team. Bruce, if you want to come up to the table. So firstly, Bruce, thanks for your ongoing work, and obviously we haven't made time to catch up with you in the last few weeks, so apologies on behalf of Chris and myself for that lack of communication. Want to open the floor over to you to talk on behalf of Te Ara Whakamoa and what's going on and what do you see the next steps as being?
Thank you, and thank you all. Quick update on our work, won't take long, and relates to what I've heard told you. We managed to hire ourselves a part-time secretary researcher before Christmas, as we were aiming to do. She does 1 day of work for us, 1 day's work a week for us, mostly at the moment starting on updating our information. We're built now a regular cycle of updating our information in some depth on what's going on in pathways, and we're also mapping the climate work that's going on in the Hutt as we go. We've developed a sketch communications plan and are partway through designing a home website, which will be a base for informing people on past, present and future climate change. It was quite fun to see Bruce up there because loosely based on the website he developed for Eastbourne, and Bruce, in fact, is a major player in getting it developed for us. So we're trying to replicate some of, but expand on what he's done across the rest of the Hutt, and including active information flowing out. And the website will include interactive maps for people to find out who's doing what about which climate issues and where. The bad news side, after our 2 transport workshops in Nainai last September, October, we've made no further progress in setting up regular public information sessions. Remains a significant problem for us. However, we are peripherally involved in the excellent work being done by James Scott and others, setting up a major expo on electrification in the Hutt, and also a charitable trust to continue the work started at the expo. scheduled for early October in the Town Hall. So looking forward, getting the website up and running and starting to get regular what's happening information out there is well underway. But how we complement and publicise this through information sessions is not so well advanced. That's really it in terms of our progress. Although I do want to reflect on a little time I spent yesterday in the, the first thing I want to reflect on is thinking about follow through and thinking about major spending up front and looking at what's been being done in the Climate Assembly in Porirua and thinking about how Pathways has worked. I think the Council can and should think more thoroughly about the long-term sustenance, both of projects and it's just a bit like the project version of what Bruce just said about repetition, the need to have resource available that keeps things ticking over and keeps things running, keeps follow through until they build critical mass. I think that's a really, really important thing for the Council to consider in projects it's developing. Looking at the Climate Assembly in Porirua, they spent 3.5 years doing it, doing more or less what we did in a year, but they're already deep into follow through and fuller engagement with the community, and they have mass and resource with them. And that process of citizen engagement is going to be hugely important in Lower Hutt. I was at the City Strategy Assembly last September. There is so much more of that sort of work that you need to do, including follow through, as things get gnarlier and gnarlier. And they are going to get gnarlier and gnarlier. They're already getting gnarlier and gnarlier. Whether or not Trump and Vance and Musk and this current climate unspeakable bunch down in the beehive disappear or not, things are going to get worse over the next 10 to 20 years in very bad ways that we're not equipped to cope with yet. And having the community on board is simply the basis for holding it together. I'm not talking about replacing all the low carbon stuff. That has to keep going too. We have to be doing both of those simultaneously. So those were the little additional comments I wanted to make. And also, finally, the small players at the bottom of the tree. It was great to be on that Local Carbon Acceleration Fund panel. Thank you very much, Andy, yesterday. And I hope to continue to be involved. And there was quite an interesting segregation between the little players who $1,000, $2,000 makes a real difference and helps them keep going, and they're literally living on a shoestring. And then the bigger players who've already got momentum, they've got capacity. Interestingly, of course, the ones who came to that fund are some of the ones who are feeling under enormous pleasure from the financial pressure as a result of the actions of the unspeakables. So I hope you just keep continuing trying to find ways to amplify, simplify, get those resources out there to a lot of the smaller players and find some ways to help the ones who are now just hanging on by their fingertips. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruce, for your ongoing work and also your consistency in coming to this committee and sharing insights as well. Questions from members? Councillor Shaw.
Thanks, Bruce, for that. I just want to pick up on something you said about what happened out at Porirua, and I didn't quite catch what was going on there. What do you think we can learn from what you were talking about earlier and what we could do better on?
So they just held an assembly after 3 years' work, and it was driven by Ngāti Toa, and it was interestingly a 50-50, and literally in the end 50 people from Mana Whenua and 50 people from Te Reti, Tangata Te Reti. And so they did all that preparatory work, then got together and pulled together a set of recommendations. At one level, what they did was what we did in our 2021-22 exercise. At another level, it engaged a bigger group of the community over a bigger time and then brought some of them in to start the process. And they know very well they're only at the beginning. In a sense, it felt like being an auditor or doing the Pathways job. You know, you do your report and you run. Yeah.
Thank you, Bruce. Any other questions? No. Thanks again, Bruce, for coming in. We're now moving on to item 5, which is conflicts of interest. Any members got a conflict to declare for this meeting? No, thank you very much. We're now moving on to item 6, which is the 6 monthly update on implementation of Indigenous biodiversity strategy. This is on page 7, members. I want to welcome up Arthur Nelson, Head of Parks and Reserves, to speak to the item. Welcome, Arthur. Please take the report as read. If there's any introductory comments you wish to make or additional information, please do so, then we'll open for questions.
Thanks for having us, Chair and Councillors. No particular other comments other than to say we're looking at a few ways of doing things differently, which comes through the report. And the other thing is we'll have some reports coming to this committee at some point in the not too distant future about a couple of those items raised. Other than that, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Arthur. Questions from members? Councillor Shaw.
Hi, Arthur. Thanks for the report. My question is around the deer culling, and I looked at the potential option to build a 2.8k of deer fencing, which is something that's going to be considered for the future. Is that correct, 2.8k? Because I'm looking at the map and it looks a whole lot further than 2.8k. Map on page 10, I think it is.
The report's been written by the team, so I'm pretty sure they'll know what they need to do down there. But we're really just in a investigation and stage of looking at the options. So obviously, as we get more information, we'll bring that back to council and keep people updated. If it is a relatively simple fix, then clearly it would be desirable to do it, I would say.
And my second question about this is, and looking at the picture, it looks like it extends as far as Nainai, I think. Are you contemplating going a little bit further north up to around Stokes Valley, where there is a considerable deer issue currently at the moment, or is this just still in its very early stages of planning?
Very early stages at the moment. I mean, if we can introduce some deer fencing to serve that large area, then clearly it would be a trade-off well worth considering. Like anything else, it would really depend on what we needed to invest to get a return.
Further questions? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, thank you, Arthur. A couple of questions for me. I think the first one, possibly you're not the right person to ask, but I'll just put it out there anyway, because it was quite interesting to read about, and I've already kind of seen what's documented in the photographs in terms of land being stripped and trampled, and it makes reference to water retention a couple of times in the paper, including that a healthy native bush should be able to hold 60% of rainfall. Do we have any idea if the flood modelling that's been done for Lower Hutt takes into account the state of our bush? It could have quite a significant impact by the sound of things, the state of our bush on flooding risk in Lower Hutt, and we've had flood risk modelling done. Do we know if it takes any account of the state of our bush?
We haven't done any serious modelling on that, but I mean it's a valid point. If we do have problems of the vegetation being stripped and compacted soil, then clearly it has a much higher runoff level. So it might well be something worthwhile looking at in the future.
Thank you. And the other question I had was about the possum control, the resetting traps that have been established between Nainai and Wainuiamata, and seemingly very effective. It talks about how there was a large number of possums there, but after 2 months, there were no possums detected compared to lots of possums outside that area. So I just wondered what that suggests in terms of next steps, either in particular areas or with use of this particular technology.
I think, we have to be a little bit careful reading in to something like that. I mean, what's obviously good is that we haven't had many possums taking the bait or taking the bite, so that's positive, but it doesn't necessarily give us a carte blanche view of what's going on in the woods. I mean, obviously there's things like weather impacts, and it's been quite hot and dry and quite other things. So I think we couldn't read too much into it, other than to say that it looks like it's a good trend, and obviously we just need to keep monitoring it. And if we continue to get a similar result, then you know, it would suggest that there's been some pretty good work done.
Brilliant. Thank you, Arthur, and thank you, members, for your questions. I'm now going to move the three noting recommendations on page 7. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Is there any discussion? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, I just did want to comment, and it was in your opening comments too, Arthur, on the thinking and progression that's going on in this space. I think it's quite easy to get stuck into doing things in a particular way or funding a particular thing. And what we noticed a few years back now was that whatever it was we were doing wasn't really enough. So I was really pleased to see these new things being tried out and thought about as ways we can address these issues in the future. So yeah, I just wanted to compliment the team on the thought that's going into different approaches to tackling these issues.
That being said, very well, Councillor Mitchell. I'm now going to put the recommendations. All in favour say aye. I declare that carried. Thank you, Arthur. Next up, we're on item 7 on page 18. Welcome up Miriam to the table, Senior Advisor Climate and Sustainability. As always, please take your report as read, but happy to hear any introductory comments you may wish to add.
Kia ora koutou. I don't have any additional information or introductory comments at this stage, so I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Open floor for elected members. Questions? Councillor Edwards.
I'm going to raise the question here, and I'm also going to raise it in my own committee at infrastructure, because in this agenda, there's talk about reducing citywide emissions. I was at a cycling event this morning and had 2 conversations with cyclists talking about why they do or don't cycle, and expected them to mention cycleways and feeling safe on the road. Both of them instead mentioned that they would use their cycles if at the end of their journey there was a safe place, a secure place to park them, where some clown with a bolt cutter wasn't going to come along and remove their expensive e-bike. And I had in mind in particular what's going to happen very shortly with the Melling line, the absolute shortage of parking down at the Western Hutt station where those trains are going to terminate, and the fact that possibly there might be a lot of Western Hills passengers and others in the city who, with the traffic disruption that's coming up in the centre city, would bike to that rail station. And I'm wondering how I get it on the council agenda to work with Greater Wellington on secure bike parking solutions, not just Western Hutt Station, but elsewhere in the city, Lockie Docks, those cabinets where you can actually wheel your bike and lock them, where thieves' options are limited. So just asking the question how we might get this onto council's agenda.
Thank you for that question. I think we do have some actions within our climate action plan around bike parking. So that is an area that we do report annually to you on progress. Some of that work is done in conjunction or in partnership with Greater Wellington Regional Council. So looking at those, I guess, hybrid journeys where you might be, like you say, biking to one point and then catching a train or a bus to another point. So that is part of their work agenda to continue to improve some of those facilities. And I know that, for example, at the Petone station, they do have quite a considerable double stacker bike parking unit there. But I do take the note that there's still more work to be done in that space. And so that is part of the work that within the cityscape, areas that aren't connected to Greater Wellington, that we would be looking at ways to improve.
And so taking on your question as well, alongside Miriam's response, I'm more than happy to contact my counterpart at Greater Wellington and ask them at an elected level what they can do, particularly with the transformational work with Riverlink. at their train station that's being moved, but also in the interim as well, what that looks like for our commuters. I think it's an easy step that we can take, and just putting that on their radar. Yeah, definitely take it on board that the work around our wider city and at council facilities is part of our wider plan to decarbonise our city as well. And so maybe in our next report, Miriam, if you can kind of touch on the timeline for that piece of work and kind of draw out that action as well and pay attention to it, and we can discuss it in more length then as well. Because it's not just at those commuter hubs. There's a lot of people that are transient across the valley as well. And yeah, if there's not a secure space to put your bike, people won't be taking them to those facilities. And a number of workspaces have their own, but not everyone has that privilege to be able to park their bike securely. Councillor Edwards.
Just as part of that investigation and liaison with Greater Wellington, the trouble with those double racks, even at Waterloo Station, where there's cameras and people moving around, thieves just doesn't worry them at all. So for me, something more secure than that is needed. And one of the options that I was keen to look at, and I don't know whether council owns any of the land or buildings or has an interest in any of the land and buildings at Station Village, but some of those buildings look a bit empty and underused. And I'm thinking there may be some key card system for registered cycle users that that it may be possible to institute that would be a genuine solution.
May I suggest that we raise that with the head of transport, because it does link quite directly to infrastructure in the transport space, and then we can come back to you on what the options might be.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Councillor Edwards, for raising that. Deputy Mayor Lawes.
Thank you. Away from traffic and cycles to the Too Good to Waste site. Are there numbers at all about the use of that site and how many people are, engaging in it and actually applying some of the, hints that are there and really good advice?
Yes, there are. We can include that in the next committee report to provide you some stats on usage of that site.
Any final questions? No. Oh, Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, I was just thinking, and I've actually got a note against another graph later in the paper that if you are providing that data over time, it's always quite useful to see where the interventions lie. So sometimes you see graphs and all of a sudden they shoot up and you sit there wondering why. So if you could note any kind of, when our PR campaign went live or whenever it was across that data as well, it's really good for us to see that those things do have impact. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm now going to move the two noting recommendations on page 18. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Is there any debate? I just want to make a few remarks myself then. Again, thank you, Councillor Edwards, for raising the opportunity and the challenge that residents are facing. As has already been noted, I think working in partnership with Greater Wellington, but also internally within our own teams in Hutt City Council will always bring the best results. And us revisiting our plan and what we already have in the pipeline and making sure that's well publicised and communicated as well, which we can do at the next meeting. And again, if there's expectation to outcome being a shortfall in that, we can discuss what that looks like and what could potentially be brought forward and the resourcing required to do that. I think particularly with the central city being under significant pressure in the not too far future, looking for all these creative solutions as the parks start to be reduced in our CBD is going to be required, and anything we can do to get ahead of that to let residents know we're intentionally trying to alleviate the pressures that will come, I'm sure will be well received both from cyclists and non-cyclists alike. I'm now going to put the motion. All in favour say aye. I declare that carried. Thank you, Miriam, and thank you, Ewan. Members, we're now on to page 25 for agenda item 8, update on solid waste management and minimisation work streams. Welcome up, Jessica, to the table. Senior Advisor Waste Planning and Strategy. If there's any additional comments you wish to make, Jessica, over to you.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you. We've got one major update would be that the Ministry for the Environment have released consultation on proposed changes to waste legislation last week. So just to update the committee that the submission is likely to be drafted subject to internal processes for that, and will likely require retrospective approval from the committee because the deadline is the 1st of June, so it'll be between meetings on there. Just a few comments to add on the battery recycling side. I did want to say thank you from the team to Bruce for all the work that has been done out at the Eastbourne Community Board that kick-started our own work. We obviously have some lessons to learn on community buy-in and looking at their experience. For the units we've chosen, we have prioritised the safety side due to battery fires, which we're seeing across the country. I think that is probably the main comments that we've got. Oh, except we would also have a look at the final destination for the batteries and report back on that for the next committee meeting.
Thank you, Jessica. Questions from members? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, just coming back to something I referred to earlier, which is the graph on page 30, the contamination graph. And in particular, interested in the, I don't know if spike's the right word for it, the increase in the early part of last year, that things were on a good trajectory and then kind of set us back for a while. Do we have any idea why that happened?
So there is some alignment with the timing of campaigns that we run. So there was, for example, quite a push in the lead up to Christmas 2023 and again 2024. Then we didn't run anything sort of between January and the middle of last year. So they do seem to coincide, but they're not particularly, it's very difficult to identify cause and effect. So we have shifted more of our effort onto face-to-face engagement, removal of severely contaminated bins on the first strike. So we have shifted the effort away from citywide communications to more targeted engagement and behaviour change initiatives like flyer drops in areas where contamination is higher. So again, it's difficult to pinpoint the exact, what's causing this or what initiative is working or not working, because you're always looking at several initiatives, so it's difficult to say whether any particular one is is the key driver.
We've got Councillor Shaw, then Councillor Edwards.
I was reading the report from Non-Stop Solutions in regards to Te Raukura event held in at Te Whiti Park early this year, and I was there and watched with interest, and I think given the graph that we're looking at on page 28, there was a lot of success with that particular program, and they reported really well on the data and the improvements in terms of capturing recycling. So looking at these events, they're all significant big events. Is there any chance that we as a council could potentially offer templates or guidelines for something similar for small scale events for groups who don't have the puti or the money to pay for an outside provider? Could we look at something like that in future so smaller events could engage a similar system? Because I thought it was really, really good.
I'm not aware of anything that we've done specifically in that space. We do have the trial up for review in June, but we have focused on the ones above that bylaw threshold. But it could be something that we could have a look at to see if we can find a simpler way to do that for the smaller events.
We do have an event organiser guide that is available to anyone. So if someone wants to develop their own plan and there's a template for a plan in there, there's a guide. There's also a guide for food vendors in terms of what materials or products they should use or could use to align with those requirements. So some of that guidance is there, but ultimately for the smaller events, we're just lacking the capacity to engage with those organisers. So that's why the focus is on the larger ones, anything over 1,000. Having said that, as those events become more accustomed to doing things differently, we would hope that also then trickles through to smaller events.
Councillor Edwards, then Councillor Mitchell.
I guess I might be thinking along the same lines as Councillor Shaw. Really interesting information in this report and really impressive the amount or kilograms of waste that were diverted from Te Rā. But I did wonder at what cost and whether it's a particularly cost-effective thing to do versus spending money on other things that offer an environmental good. And yeah, I think where Councillor Shaw was driving to, ways we could make it easier for community groups that don't have many resources, including, and this might be entirely unrealistic, but having a store of bins, bins that community groups could borrow for an event rather than them have to work out how we're going to separate paper and plastic and whatnot. And yeah, definitely a planning template that maybe might eliminate some of the paperwork and any other. It would seem to me it might be a practical way to invest in this kind of thing and continue to reduce the waste going to the landfill.
So the focus for the trial has really been about getting those event organisers some decent support to actually set up the system. So I don't think the intention is that we would necessarily fund the development of plans for the same events on an ongoing basis, because once you've developed a plan, you've sort of got the template, and if you run the same event, then you might change the service provider of who picks up the bins or who might support recycling stations, for argument's sake. But in principle, the system won't necessarily change. So the focus has been on setting up the systems and basically setting them up so that they know what to do in the future. I guess the question is, how long would we keep funding this? And we're not funding disposal, by the way. We're only funding the part that you can actually divert or what is divertible. So that's probably the first point. In terms of the overall cost, yes, absolutely agree that you can't maintain that for events going forward. That would not be cost effective. One thing I would say about things like bin hoods or having bins that community groups can take away is that has been done in the past and it hasn't worked because it's more complicated than just giving people a bin and saying, well, you put a recycling bin there, and unless you've got someone actually being accountable for it and looking at how the system works, you'll find that that bin will be used for anything but recycling. So yes, that's actually one way of coming up with a lot of contaminated recycling. So to do it properly, you need a bit of a plan. You need to have a system in place and you have the right support parties. It's a bit like, and ultimately I think the expectation is that events look at this like you run an event and you have toilets, just like you have bins, and you have some system in place that makes sure that the stuff is used accordingly. Like you wouldn't necessarily put a toilet there without anyone cleaning it or checking it occasionally whether it's actually used appropriately. We've all been to events where that thing hasn't worked and no one wants to use the toilets because of it. So it's kind of like that approach. Can we set up a system? We help them set it up, but then it's their responsibility.
Councillor Brown.
Yeah, it's such a difficult one because I completely support the kaupapa that we need to get people, recycling and change behaviour. And I know we've had this conversation around the Matariki event, and regardless of what we say, and it's a consideration around using Queen Street, but they've moved their event now to the marae, and we put a lot of resource into Queen Street, and there's a reluctance now to hold the events there because of this, even though they were well supported last year and the year before. They've decided that they're going to hold their events at the marae. And it's like you say, a lot of these events are run on volunteers and they're sort of run to the max as it is, and they just don't feel that they can keep up with this change. So we're just going to have to find a balance where we're not showing people, because now they're probably not going to recycle down at the marae, who knows, but find a balance where we're not actually putting people off running events. And I've got to say, Queen Street, we're just not really running events at the moment. A lot of it may be hearsay, you know, that it's got a bit of wheels, but also it has been difficult. So yeah, we have got less events, and how we can strike that balance.
Any questions? Did me, Lois? I think you were. What was the question? Oh,
Sorry, how can we strike that balance without losing our good, you know, places that we invested in?
Well, I guess the approach so far has been where we have tried to strike a balance is to support those community events. I mean, this, us having engaged, what are they called again? Non-stop Solutions, sorry, I just slipped my mind. Non-stop Solutions is that, well, it's fully funded by us through the waste levy. So there's really no cost to those events. All we're asking them is to fund the you know, the residual waste, the disposal of that. So we will not fund disposal of residual waste. And in fact, that's a way of getting them engaged. It's like, we're actually, you know, helping you with some of your problem. So there's no cost to that. But ultimately, yes, I agree that ultimately there is a balance in terms of someone has to then carry on the baton and keep it going. So we've focused on setting up the system, helping it get set up, and hopefully making it as easy as possible. And we may potentially also keep supporting community events going forward with at least some of the infrastructure provision. But it has to be embedded. We can't, it's not sustainable to keep doing it for other people. So at some stage it needs to be more of an ingrained thing that just happens because it's good practice. And I've personally involved in many events myself, in this case Wakaama. Yeah, and I was the last one to go around and pick up all the litter because everyone had buggered off. So there is an element to that, but if you don't do it, we're just externalizing that cost to the community and the environment. So I guess the balance, there's also a balance on that front that we have to consider.
Is the community engagement, the priority, is the waste will be priority over the ability for the group to manage it once the funding's not there, eh?
Well, that's probably a conversation we need to have as part of that review, is now that we've done 12 months of the trial, and that'd be for the team to have a chat to those organisers and actually get a bit of a sense of, you know, where are we heading? Is this workable? What support do they need? And then we can look at how we might move forward.
Deputy Mayor Loss? Okay. Any final questions before I move the motion and then we get into discussion? Nope. And so moving the recommendation that we note the contents of the report. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Brown. Any discussion? Deputy Mayor Loss?
Thank you. So putting on my supporters hat really for the program of Non-Stop Solutions and how the council's doing it, and acknowledging there is a cost and coming from the experience of Petone Rotary, who pay for Non-Stop Solutions. But what I've seen there is the event has sort of put on they're taking up the mantra of we're going to be a waste-free fair, an event. And they've just got the buy-in, and it's working with the community. So what I've seen is all the stallholders have changed over. Non-Stop Solutions works with them to get them to change their packaging. So the education is going out into different levels, into the community. And then as for the people on the street, I don't know if we actually do educate them, but at the fair it works that the school teams come in, and again they get sponsored for doing that job and doing the mahi of picking up and doing all that work. So there is money involved, yes, but it is circular and it's going back to community. And I just don't know how we get through to community per se, to not to litter. but it is giving them direction. But it's going to take a long time. It's just people and their mindsets, but I just think we've got to keep going personally. Thank you.
Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment briefly on the event waste since it's come up, and I guess just a reminder that the threshold for requiring events to think about this as 1,000 people. It doesn't matter where you do the event, so shifting an event is not a way to avoid it. It's really about the scale of those events. And it is regionally consistent. All the cities in our region require the same thing. And I guess either you do that or you continue to turn a blind eye to big events and the huge amounts of waste they can create. Having said that, and just echoing Deputy Mayor Lewis's comments about Tony's experience, and you could see it in the report from Te Rā o Te Raukura, and I was also there, that people did understand that it was a low waste event, and I think that's where we want to get to, that actually every big event is proudly a low waste event and has those facilities there and are encouraging people to use them and think a bit more about waste in general. So I think, anything we can do as a council to support that. I don't believe that council should be picking up the bill for responsible processing of waste at all big events. Some of the big events make huge amounts of money on ticket sales and things like that. It's a bit different when they're free community events, but I do think anything we can do to support events of all scales, the smaller ones included, in terms of information and infrastructure to be able to do it themselves if that's what they want to do. That's what we should really be encouraging, is for events to want to be seen to be responsible with waste and low waste events. That's the kind of cultural shift we're aiming for. So anything we can do to make it easier for people to get there, I think is worth considering.
Any other comments from councillors? Councillor Brown.
I think I agree with both councillors that we are looking for a shift and we should move towards the shift. And there will be, as always happens across the community, the shifting will happen in certain areas, in certain groups before. And maybe what Councillor Mitchell said, that there's layers of support on where we provide the support and how, we have a bit more of a targeted criteria maybe. But I certainly don't want to see events that are kind of on that cusp of around 1,000, because I wouldn't have put, Matariki maybe 1,000. But those ones that are at the cusp, the ones that, so maybe it's a consideration of what the event is, who they are. And at the end of the day, we want cultural shift, but we don't want our free, the assets not being used because some are choosing to go to other places and then probably undoing the good work that we've done with them in the first place. So I agree. Yeah.
In closing, from my perspective, all the comment that's been said is fair. I think the biggest challenge with this is the support that's being put in place is actually minimising the cost financially for event organisers as well, because if there's less waste going to landfill, that's a cost saving for them in the way they're operating, whether they're a for-profit event or a community event. But the biggest hurdle that's come up in previous meetings and again today, it's the understanding of the additional work and steps required to get that saving both for the environment and their finances is a lot. And both as a cultural shift for participants who are coming to these events, but also for the event organisers who are often volunteers and aren't necessarily experts in this space. So I think our trial to actually provide that expert advice at no cost to them has been a good one. I think the conversations that need to happen that you've alluded to, Ewan, around what is it like going forward and what's going to be continued by these event organisers that we've already partnered with, because we actually need them to continue on this journey as well, even though it's challenging. And I would be really disappointed if across the city people are choosing not to put on events because this is a barrier to them or a perception of a barrier, when actually there's opportunities for everyone to win, including the event organisers, making it a far more safe event, but also an easy event to clean up of and actually manaki their guests as well. So again, appreciate all the discussion and the way forward, being one of actual partnership with these event organisers, and knowing that the more of these events that we have that actually follow these processes, the more our community becomes socially aware of what this means to go to any event. whether it's one of 1,000 plus or whether it's a 50-person local community event, that actually we shouldn't turn up and create a whole lot of waste and expect others to clean up after us. With that all being said, we're just finishing off debate, so we'll leave it there. Sorry, Ian. After I close, I'll be happy to have any extra comment from officers. Any further debate from elected members? No. I'll put the motion recommendations on page 25 that we note in the updates on various solid waste management and minimisation matters. Thank you. I've got a second from Councillor Brown already. I'm putting the motion. All in favour say aye. I declare that carried. Ewan.
Just a very quick notice that Jeff Roberts, waste manager, or manager waste and resource recovery, has unfortunately resigned. So this will be his last committee meeting, and you will probably see a little bit more of me again. Yes, so thank you again, Jeff, for the last couple of years, and good luck in the new role.
Thank you, Ewan, for doing that acknowledgement. On behalf of the committee, thank you as well, Jeff, for your work, and all the best with your transition as well. So committee members, we're now on page 49 for agenda item 9, the committee forward program. As always, happy to take any questions, but also acknowledging we've only got a couple more meetings of this committee in this triennium. So the work plan is before us on page 50. If there's no questions, just acknowledgement to the officers for the last 2 rounds of the committee cycle. If there's anything particular you want officers to be focusing on, like we've discussed earlier in other reports, please let me know, and I'll raise that with officers accordingly. So I'll move the recommendation on page 49 that we note the committee forward program for 2025 attached as Appendix 1. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lewis. All in favour say aye. I declare that carried. I've received no questions ahead of the meeting. So now moving on to agenda item 11, our closing formalities. Thank you, Vanessa, for bringing up the closing karakia. Please feel free to join in. Me noi tātou. Unuhia, unuhia. Unuhia I te uru tapu nui, kia wātea, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairoa I te arataka tū. Ko ia rā e rongo, whakahiria ake ki runga, kia wātea, kia wātea. Aira, kua wātea, hau, pai marere. I declare the meeting formally closed at 2:53 p.m. Have a good evening, everyone.